much. So good morning, everyone, and thanks to Dara and Rachel and all the team at GeoDirectory for inviting me to speak at this year's conference. My name's Niall Delaney. I work on the Energy Statistics team in SEAI, and I'm going to speak to you today about some of the work that we've been doing around planning for district heating in Ireland, and then also the role that GeoDirectory data plays in that. But first, I'll just give you a bit of background about who we are as an organisation, and then also set some of the context for district heating. So SEAI, we're probably best known in the public eye as being the organisation that provides the grant funding for home energy upgrades. But our primary role really as an organisation is to advise the government on policy and strategy related to the sustainable energy transition. So at the moment, about 80% of Ireland's energy use still comes from fossil fuels. So our role really is in directing a shift towards a greater share of renewable energy in the economy. And we do this because as part of the EU, Ireland is legally mandated to achieve certain levels of renewable energy consumption. So under the Renewable Energy Directive, Ireland has committed to achieving a 16% share of renewable energy by 2020 and a 43% share of renewable energy by 2030. And there are consequences for not achieving those targets. So as you can see there in 2020, we actually didn't achieve that target of 16% that we set out to achieve. And we ended up paying for what's called a statistical transfer. And that's essentially where we pay another country to cover our deficit. So we ended up paying in 2020 about €50 million in total to Estonia and Denmark to cover that for us. So if you just look at the trajectory of the graph there, the progress towards the 2030 target currently doesn't look that great. So we really do need to have some strategies and policies in place that are going to continue to increase that share of renewable energy. And to understand those strategies better, it's helpful just to break down energy use into its three primary modes. And these are electricity, transport, and heat. And you can see that in 2024, each of these modes of energy use accounted for about 1/3 of Ireland's total national consumption. And for each of these modes then of energy use, we can say that a certain amount of the energy comes from renewable sources and a certain amount is non-renewable. So for electricity first, we can see in 2024, 41% of Ireland's electricity came from renewable sources. And that's not far off the EU average of 47%. And it's not really too surprising because we know Ireland has a lot of wind farms, and in recent years we've seen a lot of large-scale solar farms come online as well. So we're actually going to continue to see that number increase up to 2030. In terms of transport then, 9% of the fuel used in Irish transport in 2024 was renewable fuel. Again, not far off the EU average of 11%. And intuition might say that that's more to do with electric vehicles coming on the road, but actually it's to do more with the mixing of biofuels into petrol and diesel. So when you go to the pump now, the petrol pump, and you see E10 written on the pump, that just means that 10% of that fuel is biofuel, which is renewable. It's only when you look at heating then you see a slightly different trend. So 8% of the fuel used in Irish heating in 24 is considered renewable. And it's actually a lot lower than the EU average of 26%. And in fact, Ireland ranks as the lowest share of renewable heating out of all countries in Europe. And when you compare it to the performance of countries like Sweden and Finland up the top there, who can achieve between 60 and 70% renewable heating, it's obvious that these countries are doing something that we're not. So you have to wonder what it is. And the answer is that they all employ a form of heating called district heating. And district heating is a system of providing heat to buildings where the heat comes from a centralized source. And the simplest comparison to make there is to think about how the electricity grid works at the moment. So when you switch on the lights in your home, that electricity has been generated elsewhere, usually at a power plant or say a wind farm or something. And then it's transmitted to you through a large network that a lot of other homes and businesses are connected to. But district heating works in a very similar way, except what's been transmitted to you is hot water. So at the moment, most homes and businesses in Ireland will have their own individual boilers. And when there's a requirement to heat that building, that boiler will circulate hot water to all the radiators in the different rooms. And that's where the heat comes from. But on a district heating network, you still use all the same radiators, all the same plumbing. It's just that the water gets heated elsewhere at a much larger industrial size boiler. And that heat then circulates around the network to all the different homes and businesses that are connected to it. So this type of heating system, it's been around for a very long time. It first started being employed in Europe in the early 1940s. And as I said, in Sweden, it accounts now for heating of 60% of all buildings. And this type of system, it tends to work better in urban areas where you have a large amount of heat demand concentrated in a relatively small space. Because if you think about it, the less pipe work you have to lay, the more economically viable these projects become. What makes it a renewable form of heating, though, is just where the heat comes from. So generally, these systems will rely on capturing of waste heat and excess heat that are created through other processes. And the classic examples here are data centers and waste incinerators. So with data centers, we all know that computers constantly need to be kept cool. So you can imagine how much heat is just generated out of a data center every day. And rather than letting that heat go to waste, it is possible to connect data centers up to district heating networks to provide that hot water. And waste incinerators are also very common. So out in Poolbeg, we have a relatively new facility out there. And that incinerator is for incineration of non-recyclable waste, but there's a lot of energy that's produced from that process. And again, that heat that's released could be used to heat water for a district heating network. And that Poolbeg facility was actually built with district heating in mind. So it's already got all the infrastructure in place and it's ready to be connected up. So really what you have then is a sort of system for providing heat in a renewable way that is well established in Europe. And that's why Ireland now is looking to this type of system as a potential future solution to heating of buildings here. And for that reason, we've explicitly set targets within the Climate Action Plan to deliver up to 2.7 terawatt hours of heat per year through district heating by 2030. And 2.7 terawatt hours a year equates to approximately 10% of the demand for buildings in Ireland at the moment. Separately then in 2024, the Dáil passed the heat bill, and this just provides a regulatory framework for the development of district heating and also the operation of district heating as a utility. And just last year then, 2025, there was the announcement of a provision for a €5 million pre-construction fund, and this is just to assist with the planning of any district heating projects in the next few years across the country. So the question is really, where do these networks get built and how do we plan for them? And that's where GeoDirectory data comes in. So we're looking here at a map of Tala in South County Dublin. And suppose we wanted to plan out a district heating network in Tala. And I've chosen this area in particular because in 2023, they actually did construct and launch Ireland's first large-scale district heating network. So it'll just be interesting to go through some of the steps here and then compare it with what they've built so far. So the first step here is first step in planning any district heating network really is to understand how much heat is being used by each of the buildings here. And that'll allow us to identify areas where there's a high density of heat demand. Because as I said before, you really want to lay less pipe work because that's going to really make the project more economically viable. So we can use GeoDirectory first to identify which of these buildings in the image are commercial and which ones are residential. And that initial split is quite important because it's commercial buildings really that tend to use a lot more heat. So those are the ones that you really want to be targeting first. You can then go a step further and use the NACE codes to establish exactly what type of commercial activity is happening within these buildings. And that's important because naturally some commercial activities involve or have a higher demand for heat than other ones. So you can imagine large hospitals, university campuses or leisure centres with swimming pools. They're all going to have a higher demand for heat than something like, say, a large office block. Another benefit of using the NACE codes then is that we can just exclude certain buildings entirely. So things like industrial buildings or warehouses, they generally have a very small demand for space heating, so we can just exclude them. So very quickly then we're able to whittle down the commercial buildings in Tala to the ones that are involved in these specific 8 activities here. And just a note as well, I've also excluded here any buildings that are currently heated by electricity, because these district heating networks, they're kind of intended for buildings where hot water circulates to radiators, and that's generally not the case when you have electric heating. So the next step then is to assign a heating demand to each of these buildings. As I said, they all fall into one of 8 categories. And we know from all our reporting and data collection in SEAI just how much energy is used for heating within each of these sectors every year. So it makes it quite straightforward to just infer a level of heating demand for each of these buildings here. And that's what we're looking at here. So the darker red colours, they're kind of the buildings where you have a relatively large demand for heat. And the lighter kind of shades of red and orange are the ones where you have a relatively low demand for heat. And there's probably 3 that are popping out there. Over towards the left of the image, you have Tala Hospital. Sort of in the middle of the 3 is the South Dublin County Council offices. And over towards the right there, you have Tala, or TUD Tala, the university campus. So these are three buildings we probably want to target for a district heating network. Now, I said that the commercial buildings are more important than the residential ones. That's not to say the residential aren't, or that they should be excluded entirely. They are still very suitable for connection to one of these networks. It just really depends on the type of building and also the density of the housing. But again, we can use GeoDirectory to identify what type of buildings they are. We can exclude anything that's on electricity and assign each of them a heat demand. And as you can imagine, it tends to be sort of apartment buildings where you have a high density of dwellings within a single building that tend to be more favourable for connection to these networks. So that completes the first stage of the planning for these type of networks. It's to understand how much heat each of these buildings is using every year. The next step then is to summarize all this information and just make it very clear as to where we should be targeting. And we can do that by calculating the heat demand density. And this just makes it very clear, I think, that there's 2 major hotspots around Tala that any network should be targeting. It's over to the left there towards the Tala Hospital and maybe some of the surrounding residential areas, and then over towards the university campus as well, with some of the commercial buildings just south of that. So the next thing we do is overlay the road network. That's ultimately where the pipeline is going to be laid, and just imprint that heat density onto the roads. So the idea of this is just to get an initial high-level pass of areas that may be of interest. So what we really want to do is create a single zone out of those areas with the kind of high density of heat demand, those red roads. So we use census small areas just to create a single zone around them, just to flag them as a sort of area that probably warrant more detailed feasibility studies. And as I said, Tala have already constructed their own district heating network and it's fully operational today. It is only in its first phase, so there's only a handful of buildings connected at the moment. But as you can see, they have already connected up 2 of those 3 main buildings that we've talked about. The first is over on the right there, it's the university campus, and then the South Dublin County Council offices. And later phases of this project are going to aim to expand west up to that hospital as well. And just an interesting to note here that this system is currently heated based on a data center. There's an Amazon data center out in Tala, and all the excess heat from the computers there is used to heat up the water for this network. So we've carried out this type of analysis all across the country, and I'm just going to fly through a few examples here of projects that are currently in the planning phase, just so we can compare to our analysis, just to show that what we've done kind of lines up with what's actually happening on the ground at the moment. So this is a project here that's been proposed for the Blanchardstown area. It's been led by Codema, which is Dublin's energy agency. And they're proposing this network which is the purple line, that's going to connect up Connolly Hospital to the National Aquatic Centre and then out to TUD Blanchardstown as well. So all sort of buildings that have a really high demand for heat and would be suitable for a district heating network. And again, that network is planned to be heated using an Amazon data centre, just up the top left there. But the important thing is it does line up quite well with the heat demand mapping analysis that we've done. And similarly, there's another project being proposed now and in the planning stages out in Galway City. So just east of Galway City, there's a project being led there by HeatGrid. And again, they're aiming to connect up a couple of different hospitals as well as a university and some of the local authority buildings as well. But again, that sort of proposed network is lining up quite well with that heat demand mapping analysis. But as I said, we've carried out that analysis across the entire country, and we've identified about 50 different areas across the country that seem to have potential for these networks. And we've published the results of that analysis into this online GIS web app. So if you're interested in exploring those different areas that we've identified, I think this link will be circulated later with the slides. But just in terms of next steps then, this year we'll be releasing a few reports related to district heating. The first is a national level assessment of district heating. This is just going to give a general overview of the state of the market here, but also we'll have a bit of a discussion about the results of that mapping analysis that we've done, just to get a sense of what that target of 2.7 terawatt hours per year actually looks like in terms of number of buildings that might need to be connected, and also how many potential networks we might need. And then secondly, there's a series of reports coming called the Comprehensive Assessment of Heating and Cooling. It's going to be an overview of heating in general in Ireland, but one of the reports in that will be specifically related to district heating. And it's going to go much deeper than we've done with our initial heat demand analysis. It's going to start looking at sort of economic viability of projects as well. So that's everything I have for you today, and I look forward to the questions.